Welcome to this week presentation. In this presentation, we are more specifically going to discuss about the mainstream media like television, newspaper and film, and the role of audience in these three platforms, and how Indian media is playing in this context, and we will try to understand the profile of audience in these three media platforms. Why we have selected only three? In Indian context, television is a major player. It has huge number of audience market size, nearly 800 million audience for various channels. This is according to 2020 data. Not only the audience size, television gets nearly 44% of advertisement revenue from the overall advertisement market. So the television is a major player, and followed by newspaper, and then third is digital media, and the fourth is a film. Since we are going to have a separate presentation on digital media, so we will discuss about this first four, excluding digital media: television, newspaper and film. In any communication settings, the basic thumb rule is know your audience. So in the communication types are different, our roles are different. Sometime in interpersonal level, two people, a kind of, if it is a marketing situation, the person who is selling the product will have a kind of agenda. The main agenda for the person who is selling the product to influence the consumer, to motivate the person to buy the product or take a decision on the product. If it is a group, it's a political meeting, religious meeting, or any public meeting, the politician or the religious leader, they have a different agenda. They have to convince the listeners to change their opinion. This is their motive. If you are a columnist, and if you are not attached within a newspaper, you are a subject expert of any particular domain, then you have liberty to give your opinion. Your opinion pieces in the newspaper not necessarily objective. You can take a subjective stand. So when I decided to write an article or making a media content, I should be able to understand my audience. Accordingly, I'll plan my information, I'll plan my delivery, I will arrange my information in such an order. I'll put a hierarchy. Okay, this information go first, and this goes second, and this goes last. So accordingly, because ultimately the audience should be able to understand and be able to decode what I am trying to convey. If there is a mismatch of understanding between the sender and the receiver, then automatically communication fails. Many times it happens like that. Particularly when we are in an interpersonal level, I am communicating with one person, communicating with five people, I will get a lot of non-verbal cues. So that gives kind of signal saying that, okay, I am in the right way, or that the information going is not a correct way. So automatically, not only non-verbal, immediately there is an immediate guarantee of feedback. The other side of the feedback always helps the presenter to change the tone, tenure and the content, and sometimes to change the pattern also. But in the mass media level, that may not happen. Once delivered, that's it, goes to the mass. So we have to be very careful, and accordingly, according to the audience profile, the information has to be presented. Not necessarily only presenting information. When you are arguing, particularly in the mass media level, when we are informing to the mass, we are not in a position to sit with each one to explain if any doubt comes. We have to anticipate in our argument, saying that this is our argument, and we have to anticipate that this kind of questions may rise from the audience side. If arguments comes and the counter argument comes for our statement, then what could be the answer? So we have to anticipate the arguments, we have to anticipate the questions comes from the audience. We have to try to give answer for the counter argument within our media content, either article or video content or other packages. So that's very important, understanding the audience and accordingly presenting the information, and trying to understand the counter argument and try to build the discussion within the meeting, within the content, within the media. Before moving on to the Indian profile, we will understand the basic definitions of audience. Audience, the term audience basically refers to the face-to-face communication, the initial understanding, giving audience, understanding, attending somebody's lecture and giving audience to somebody, and kind of face-to-face situation thing. And once the technology provided the platform for communicating in a wider audience, particularly in a radio and television, the audience, the term audience slowly got a significance and attached with electronic media. Newspaper, we call it as a reader. And in electronic media, audience is a common term, particularly with the radio. And in a film, we call it a film audience or film goers or the viewers, the different term. And digital media, we have a different term called users. So the audience primarily it's related to the electronic media, and it's a kind of collection of people. And earlier, before electronic media, the audience might have been in the community settings, in the traditional folk entertainment platform. And in the film screening also, kind of a collective group gathering is possible still. We used to watch a film with a group of people, 100, 200 people, and not necessarily enjoying the film. We used to kind of informally, kind of unstructured way of enjoying entertainment along with a group. Whenever group enjoys, then we tend to go along with a group. So that's a group and community kind of media engagement happened earlier and along with the film. In some extent, in a small scale level, a small level happens with the television. Not necessarily with the outsiders, but with the family members, maybe 2-3 people or 5-10 people there. But once comes to the newspaper and it's being fragmented, it's kind of more into the individualistic in nature. It's a relationship between a newspaper and a particular reader, and the presentation also more or less kind of individualistic transaction happens that. And television particularly, we used to have kind of spectator and audience kind of relationship we'll maintain. That compared to newspaper, we have more affinity with a news personality or film personality or television personality through the television platform, because that audio visual impact, and we are able to identify a person, and depends upon the loyalty, we get a more affinity with that, which is little lesser in the newspapers. Of course, over the period of reading and in-depth involvement with the newspaper reading, we get kind of association with a particular correspondent or particular columnist. So that's a kind of profile, a kind of small group. Then if it is then the unit we were discussing about different kinds of audience, group, crowd and mass. In the mass media, we're dealing with a mass audience. Mass audience may not be a homogeneous, it's a heterogeneous. Comes from multiple background, multiple audience profile, and comes from multiple socio-economic conditions. And one of the main point is whether media can exist without audience. If there were no media, would there be an audience? It's very difficult to extricate the two ideas. In the dense forest, a big tree is falling, automatically that falling for that the incident creates a lot of noise. If nobody is there in the dense forest, whether the sound is being transmitted to anyone else, whether communication happened or not. So it's a very hypothetical situation thing. But in the media context, at least in the mass media level, a certain number is guaranteed. And we will look at the numbers in the later presentations. In the historical dimension, if you look at the audience, we were talking about the different terms for different medium, user or audience or film goers, a participant in informal or face-to-face communication settings. But in the 1920s and 30s, the electronic media came, then the term audience started getting a popularity. Before that, the audience, a participant usually with the community gathering, more specifically to the folk-based, traditional media-based entertainment. And once electronic media is being introduced, then the audience, particularly more closer to the radio. In the late 90s and after that, we got a digital media where the audience role got changed completely, and where we call it as a users, the internet user, a digital media user, or an online user, like that. Okay. And whatever the different technology, whatever the media platform, the audience role is significant. Understanding audience is more important than. And some of the points may help for the communicator to understand the profile of audience. Whether one of the main point is to understand the age profile, to understand the gender profile, to understand the belief system, psychological profile, whether they have this kind of lenient to the left side or right side of the ideology or center, what set of audience you have that, because that major that sometimes influence, that's a major factor, influences the communication process, age, gender, political system, and the socio-economic and cultural backgrounds. So all this matters because the audience, not necessarily only for communication process, the communication system, newspaper, television or radio, audio or film, they are commercial entities, and they are dealing with a product, they are selling the product to the audience. One is through news, to the media content, they are getting the audience. Here their communication process happening, they are delivering the process. But the getting the audience is another biggest advantage for the media institutions. Based on the size of the audience, they will get the advertisements. We were discussing the last week's presentation that the newspaper cost would have been much higher if there is no advertisements for the newspapers. The advertisements subsidize the production cost, and the revenue also adds the profit for the newspaper to subsidize the production cost. That makes the affordability of common people to buy a newspaper. And this is how the economic conditions, and this is how the educational and age, gender and the rural urban background, that profile gives the better understanding of your audience. There are three ways in which we can analyze the audience segment. Of course, the institutions, media institutions, they have separate department, in-house department, or they may go for outside agency to analyze that audience. But whatever way, whether it's internal or external agency or within the small scale level, we are trying to understand our audience. Primarily, there are three ways in which we can understand the audience segment. One is a demographic audience profile. Then another one is psychographic information, and third is situational analysis. On that basis, what are the information available in the public domain, the TRP ratings or IRS study or the film based study, we have got certain number of information. Based on the information, we will try to understand the broader picture of the newspaper, a television or film audience. What are the profile, what are the age group, what sort of people are coming, and who are the people engaged with the social wide communication process. First, we will understand the profile of Indian television audience. And if you look at the profile, the age group, and we can classify the audience into 5 segments, like children, young adults, and senior citizens, and senior most citizen, the people above 80 years. These are 5 categories of audience being segmented based on the BARC, Broadcast Association of India. It's the independent entity supported by the industry organizations. They regularly conduct the audience analysis. This data comes from the BARC data, 2017 data. This is available in the online, and based on which this data is being presented. So, according to the BARC data 2017, children occupies 20% of television audience. The young adults 15 to 30 years old, then the adults from 31 to 50 years is at 32%. Then mature people, the people 51 to 60 years, they are 9%, and 60 and above are 7%. If you look at the male, female and rural urban segment, According to the population, we have got 48% of female and 52% of male. But if you look at the television viewership, it's 50%, 50%, equally distributed. Population, there is a minor deviation, 52-48, but whereas comes to television, the viewership can be divided into male and female, it's exactly 50-50. If you look at the population size in terms of urban and rural, it's a 56% and 44%. 56% from the rural, 44% in urban context. If you look at the television viewership, the viewership is 54% comes from rural segment and then 46% comes from urban segment. The domination, huge number of audience comes from the rural segment. A male and female are completely equal in terms of sharing the television viewership. Now we will come to the point of television audience, what sort of content they prefer that. 82% of the television viewership is spent for entertainment. Television medium meant for entertainment. 53% general entertainment, and movies takes 23% and music 6%. That's in 2016. 2017, 51% general entertainment, 25% movies and 7% music. Altogether it's 82%. The major dominating demand for television content is entertainment. If you look at the advertisement revenue also, the major chunk of the revenue comes from entertainment segment only. Second to the entertainment is a news. News plays a role in the television, but in a very small level. It's with a 7%. 7% of television viewership goes for news and news-based programs. 82% entertainment and 7% for news. The remaining for kids, sports, youth, infotainment, other category. Other category includes devotional, lifestyle and business news. So understand that with a young audience and large chunk of audience comes from rural segment, the television segment catering mainly on entertainment, the revenue comes mainly for entertainment. So that's a relationship between the medium and the audience. When comes to the newspapers, we have a regular IRS study, Indian Readership Study. According to the latest study of 2019, the newspaper primarily meant for people who have basic literacy. Literacy, since unlike a television, radio or other medium, this newspaper medium demands certain level of literacy skill. Without reading, writing ability, and the person may not be able to understand the content of the particular language. So the basic information about the language proficiency, that comes from the IRS study 2019. If you look at the 2019 data, 16% of them have the education, they did education in English medium, young audience. Then there are 30% of the people, 30% of the newspaper audience, they know at least one language to read and write, and 10% of them are graduates and 21% of the illiteracy. It's within the last, illiteracy means the newspaper may be subscribed in that house or in the office, but they may not be able to read because of the illiteracy. So this is the language profile of audience. 16% they did a schooling in the English medium, and 30% knows at least one language, and 10% of them are graduates. And if you look at the rural urban divide in 2019 data, 24% of the newspaper readership comes from urban segment, and they did schooling in English medium, and 42% of the urban people they know at least one language. If you compare with the rural people, rural segment, 42% of urban knows one language of reading, writing, and 23% of rural segment knows at least one language of reading, writing. And the graduates from urban is 17 and 6% from rural segment. And if you look at the profile of a newspaper audience who has access to other medium like film, radio, television, digital. So here the data shows the four medium, access to the four medium apart from the newspaper, television, radio and digital. Including newspaper, it's become a four medium. In 2019 data, 31% of newspaper readers access to only one medium among these four, and 24% they have access to at least two medium, either television or digital or newspaper or radio, and only 10% of the newspaper readers have access to all the four media: newspaper, radio, television and digital. So, this is a profile of newspaper, and we will come to the last segment of the film. According to the 2019 data, 71% of the cinema goers were aged 15 to 24. Nearly two-thirds of film goers, the people who are watching the film in the theatre, belongs to very young age, 15 to 24. And 61% of film viewers, film audience, comes from very affluent segment. Young and affluent, they are the one frequently visit the theatre at least once or twice within the 6 months. So, that is the basic information available as of now about the film. Young affluent segment for film, and a very small level of people who can afford to access all the multiple medium in the newspaper. And in the television industry, it's young people that prefer majority of entertainment content, and the film is mainly entertainment. Particularly the newspaper is there is no scope of entertainment, but it's purely information and news. Within this news and information, two factors always dominate. One, close affinity. Close affinity means information about my surroundings, information which is related to my life, my career, my family. So, that the story about my state, my city, story about national or international stories, these informations are dominated in the newspaper consumption, and other stories are it takes a little secondary and tertiary position. Primarily the information which is closer to myself, closer to my family, closer to my career, closer to my profile. So, this is the profile of newspaper, television and film audience. That is what we discussed in this presentation. The next presentation we will discuss in detail about digital media users.